Miss Caroline began the day by reading us a story about cats. The cats had long conversations with one another. They wore cunning little clothes and lived in a warm house beneath a kitchen stove. By the time Mrs. Cat called the drugstore for an order of chocolate malted mice, the class was wriggling like a bucket full of catawba worms. All right, so now were they paying attention?
No.
No, because they're sitting there wriggling in their seats, right? Let's keep going. Miss Caroline seemed unaware that the ragged, denim-shirted, and flour-sack-skirted first grade, most of whom had chopped cotton and fed hogs from the time they were able to walk, were immune to imaginative literature. Miss Caroline came to the end of the story and said, "Oh my, wasn't that nice?" Now, what is Harper Lee doing here and why? Why is she giving this scene of Miss Caroline teaching the first grade? What is she trying to tell the reader? What is she getting at? Is Miss Caroline connecting with her students?
No.
No. Why not? Does the story that she's telling the students about the middle-class mice who are nicely dressed relate to the reality of the poor farming children? Are the mice in the story dressed like the children in the classroom?
No.
How are the children in the classroom dressed? Are they wealthy? No, they're poor. They're working class. They're farmers, right? How do we know that? Ragged, denim-shirted, right? Denim is like the stuff that the blue jeans are made out of, right? Yeah. And if it's worn as a shirt, if I'm working here and I have a tie and a cotton shirt on, right, I'm not doing hard physical labor, right? Because that cotton shirt is not going to stand up long under hard physical labor. Denim shirts, however, that are more like blue jeans will stand up longer under hard physical labor, right? Also, flour sack skirted. What is that? Do you guys know what that is? Probably not, right? So, in the South, during this time, during the Depression in the 30s, you would go to the store and you would buy a big, huge sack full of flour. Flour is what you would make bread out of, right? Biscuits, that sort of thing, right? Once all the flour had been used up, you still had the sack, right? Are you going to throw that sack away? No, you're going to use it. You're going to cut it, and you're going to make a skirt for one of your daughters to wear to school. Now, if you're doing that with the sack that you just got your flour out of, do you have a lot of money? No, right?
So, do you mean like the bag?
Yeah, the bag, right? So this is saying something about the level of poverty of most of the students in the classroom, right? So the students in the classroom are poor farmers, accustomed to hard physical labor, right? They're not middle class. They don't wear nice, expensive clothes, right? So there's a disconnect between the story that Miss Caroline is presenting the students to instruct them and the lives of the students, right? When the students are listening to the story, they don't recognize themselves in the story, right? Now, if the cats were planting cotton or picking cotton or, plowing a field, right? Or having to feed the hogs, right? That would be a story that the children could relate to, that they might be interested in, right? But are they interested in this story? No. Why not? Because they can't relate to it, right? Because it doesn't reflect their social economic background, right? So this is one criticism of Miss Caroline as a teacher and of the educational system. Because we can't make an argument based upon one quote. We can't say, see, there it is, right? So, but she's going to give us more information, right? So, then what she does is Miss Caroline goes to the board and she writes the alphabet on the board, right? And then she asks the question, does anybody know what these are? And this is what Scout says as the narrator. Everybody did. Most of the first grade had failed it last year. Now, by it, I take it to mean the first grade, right? So this is what Scout is saying as the narrator. She said, well, everybody did. In other words, everybody knew the alphabet. Why? Because most of the first grade had failed it last year. So there should be a question. Why are the students repeating the first grade? Right? Okay, we get an answer to that. We're going to jump from chapter 2 to chapter 3, because chapter 3 is going to give us the answer. Look on page 31, chapter 3. Alright, so we're going to come back to page 22, because we want to get an answer to this question that's presented to us on 22. Because Scott has said most of the students failed the first grade last year. We want to know why. Now we get an explanation as to why. Because remember, Walter Cunningham is invited to have lunch with the Finches, right? So he comes home with the Finches. Now remember, Walter Cunningham is the son of Walter Cunningham, who's a poor farmer, right? This is during the Depression. Remember, Walter Cunningham didn't have any money to buy lunch, right? So he was invited to the Finches so he could have lunch. Now, he sat down at the table, and this is the conversation that he's having with Atticus. This is the bottom of 31. This is what he says to Atticus. Reason I can't pass the first grade, Mr. Finch, is I've had to stay out every spring and help Papa with the chapel. But there's another at the house now that's field size. So, what important information is Walter Cunningham giving us about why the majority of students are having to repeat the first grade? Now, are they having to repeat the first grade because they're stupid?
No.
Are they having to repeat the first grade because they don't study?
No.
No. They're having to repeat the first grade because the system is set up in such a way that it's inflexible. It doesn't pay attention to the needs of the students, right? It disregards who its student body really is. And we've seen this with Miss Caroline in the story that she tells the students. It is disconnected from the lives of the students, just like the school schedule. Because the majority of the students are poor farming students. So they have a choice. They either help the parents bring in the crop, which then can be sold to support the family so they can eat, or they go to school. Given such a chance, or given such a choice, they have no choice but to work, right? So since every spring they have to work, they can't go to school. Because they can't go to school, they fail. Now, why is it the case that the majority of students are farm kids who have to miss every spring to bring in the crop in order to survive, and the school can't adapt its schedule to meet the needs of the students? Why? Who knows why? She doesn't really say. But what we can say for certain is that it's not meeting the needs of the students. And as a result, the majority of the students are failing school. Is it their fault? No. Is it a failure of public education? Yes. What does it either purposely or indirectly create? A mass of students who will always be sheep or boxers and can't possibly be anything else. Alright, so public education fails to meet the needs of the students because its schedule doesn't adapt to the needs of the majority of its students, who are working farmers. Okay, so let's go back to 22. All right. Now, again, this is a big section about education, and I think it's important because now what we get is Miss Caroline's interaction with Scout. And So we have to compare that to what we would expect and what actually happens. Okay, so now, this is what we might expect, right? So the first day of the first grade, you guys walk into my class, and you can already read and write. What do you expect my reaction to be?
Surprised.
Surprised, happy, encouraging, right? Oh, really? You can read and write? What books have you read? Are you keeping a journal? Here are some other books that you might like, right? It would be encouraging. It would be, I would be happy, right? Now, so we expect sort of happiness and encouragement on the part of the teacher, right? Presented with such an ideal, exceptional student. However, how does Miss Caroline react? Well, this is what Scout says. She discovered that I was literate and looked at me, and this is on page 22. She discovered that I was literate and looked at me with more than faint distaste. Miss Caroline told me to tell my father not to teach me anymore. It would interfere with my reading. Does that statement make sense?
No.
That statement doesn't make sense if you want exceptional students. Because clearly, Scout is an exceptional student. But what if you want the opposite? What if you want a classroom of mediocre students? Then that statement makes complete sense. Right? All right. Then Miss Caroline continues with the same sort of criticism. Look on page 23. Now you tell your father not to teach you anymore. It's best to begin reading with a fresh mind. You tell him, I'll take over from here and try to undo the damage. Now, this whole phrase about undoing something, where have we heard that before? Remember, we always want to keep in mind books that we've read and compare them to books that we read, right? So remember that quote by Beatty. I just happen to have it right here. So remember, in Fahrenheit 451, this is what Beatty says to Montag. You can't rid yourselves of all the odd ducks in just a few years. The home environment can undo a lot you try to do at school. That's why we've lowered the kindergarten age year after year until now we're almost snatching them from the cradle. Right? So the home environment can undo a lot you try to do at school. Now, you tell him I'll take over from here and try to undo the damage. See how the one statement by Miss Caroline sort of resonates what Beatty is saying to Montag about the nature of education? That conflict between the family and the state, right? And how the state wants to win that conflict. If you take that within the context of what Beatty says, well, what is it that Miss Caroline is trying to undo? She's trying to undo the fact that Scout is exceptional. She wants Scout to be mediocre, just like everyone else in the classroom. Remember, Beatty says we must all be alike. Right?
Why?
Well, it goes back to that triangle, right? Which is a more stable society? This or this? That's right. So how are you going to create that? How are you going to create a society where the majority of people are mediocre? Public education. See, that's the real criticism. Public education isn't meant to make you exceptional. Public education is to make you mediocre, where you are content to let other people do the thinking for you and you are satisfied just to follow. It doesn't want you to be exceptional. It wants you to be average. It wants you to be just like everyone else. That is the sole purpose of public education.
So are you trying Miss Caroline did it because she wants to stabilize the hierarchy of society.
Maybe she's not even aware that that's the purpose, right? Because after all, she's just like Boxer. Boxer's really not that smart. But there's someone somewhere in the hierarchy of education who's probably at the top of that pyramid who knows that a stable society looks like this, and it doesn't look like this. And so to create a society that looks like this, a vast majority of the people have to be mediocre. How are you going to make that happen?